You've done the right thing. You've insulated your ceiling. You've insulated your underfloor. But you're still cold. Best you finish the job. And to match your walls.
As I said, budget day. My texts indicate many of you slept just fine last night, and it may not be the focus of your day. But if you're involved in politics, if you're involved in economics, and some would say if you're involved in lobbying, the budget's a big deal. And a guy, I'm sure, has seen many of them, and this is like Christmas for him, but not without the presents, is Cameron Bagrie, economist Cameron Bagrie, who joins us now. Cam, how are you, mate?
Morning, Sean.
They come around every year, don't they? Budget, smudget.
Yeah, well, it's a big sort of lolly scramble, the big epicentre of every finance minister for the year. But at the end of the day, you got to do the job for 12 months of the year, so you can't just focus too much on one day.
All right. Does it, in terms of mood of an economy or direction of economy, is a budget something that can change course? Is a budget something that can lift or alter direction in a kind of, in a vibe way, in a feels way?
Well, it can do both, directly and indirectly. Look, indirectly, you've got the feel-good factor, but directly, you've got the role of government in regard to, look, they're about 1/3 of the economy. So what they're doing with their spending, their tax policy really matters, but what they're doing with the regulatory settings, i.e., they're making it harder, they're making it easier, that also has an impact as well. So fiscal policy is a big part of your economy. What we tend to get a little bit too caught up in my view, across New Zealand, is the role of monetary policy, which is old interest rates. What the former governor, Adrian Orr, used to do with monetary policy settings. Interest rates go up, interest rates go down. There's not an awful lot of commentary on the role of fiscal policy, but when the government's about 1/3 of your economy and they also control all your regulatory settings, they pack a fair bit of economic punch.
All right. Now, you need to explain this to me. I should know this, being a business owner. I really should, Cameron. People have talked about tax relief through depreciation. Can you explain that to us normal people? And it seems likely this has been well signalled. Depreciation rates for businesses are going to change. Give me a thick person's guide, not that you're thick, it's that I am, as to what we're talking about here and what effect that will have.
Well, if you're looking at investing and you're a business and you can get an accelerated depreciation rate.
No, we need to go back further than that. What's a depreciation rate, Cameron? I reckon there are a lot of people listening who don't quite grasp it. I really want to get the 101 depreciation regime.
Well, when you invest in something, you buy something for your business, right? You want to make sure that asset works for your business.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the way it works is that you're allowed to tax deduct what's called depreciate the value of that asset. So the greater the depreciation rate, the less the upfront, well, not the upfront, but less the expense on your business in regards to the bottom line. So if you can accelerate the depreciation in the near term, it encourages firms to get out there and maybe invest a little bit more on their business.
Okay, we're talking about plant and equipment here?
Yeah, plant and equipment, but there's wider areas as well. But I guess if I step back and think about let's not get too caught up in this sort of stuff. There's a wider issue here in regard to what's the right tax ratio as a share of GDP.
Right.
And do we know an answer to that? The answer is no. What we know is that if you're paying tax, you want to make sure that the government's using your money wisely.
Yep.
And I think the average individual out there would say, look, I wouldn't mind paying a little bit more tax if I knew the money was being well spent. That's the big issue.
Right. Okay. Does the change in the depreciation regime, and to a Luddite like me, it sounds like that means people will be paying less tax because they'll be able to.
But potentially in one segment, right? But you've got to sit there and think about, look, the spending demands for New Zealand are going north. They're not going south. Yeah, so if we're going to be handing out some sort of goodies and depreciation sort of area, you're going to have to find some money in other areas. And the big thing about this budget, I call this is the Peter versus the Paul budget. Look, we know the government's going to have to be pushing money into health. We know the government's going to be pushing money into education, police, defence.
Yeah.
We also know that it's effectively a zero budget, so there's
no new spending,
money.
effectively, as a whole.
Yeah, it's a reprioritised budget. So if there's some areas which we call Paul are getting money, then there's some other areas which are Peter, which are losing money. And we all want to find out today who's Peter.
Okay, so who's getting robbed and who's getting paid is really what we're looking for today, isn't it? Have we got a clear indication of who is? Because generally these things get well signalled, don't they?
Well, we got a little bit. Like the pay equity stuff is obviously going to save the government a fair bit of dough. I think there's going to be some tweaks to KiwiSaver in regard to what the government's contributions are going to be, but I suspect there's going to be a couple of other eye-openers. And so once again, all eyes on Peter.
All right. Now, look, it's interesting you mentioned, I got it down here to raise it with you, the pay equity changes. They are being typified by the opposition as something that had to be done because the books were in such bad shape and the potential liability of those pay equity settlements under the old criteria was just too much for the government to bear. Was that, or has that been, do you think, a massive factor in trying to keep the books more balanced, or is that a piece of political rhetoric?
I think it's a little bit of both, right? There'll be some direct upfront savings. What it also does, it removes what's called a fiscal risk. Yeah, so the devil in any budget is not necessarily the numbers. You've got to go through the fiscal risk section, or there's a whole chapter. And what it basically says is it's a summary of what the government could be on the hook in over the next sort of few years. And it's a bit of an eye-opening chapter, because all of a sudden you realise the extent of fiscal pressures, whether that come through education, health, police, an awful lot of these derelict buildings we've got around the place in regard to infrastructure, etc., etc., etc. Budgets, you got to be a little bit wary of them, because what tends to go on is that we end up every year, there's what's called the fiscal creep. And the fiscal creep is that government spending always ends up being higher than what's expected.
Yeah.
Why? Because you just end up with the unexpected. These fiscal risks become reality, or pay claims come to fruition. Which
and to be honest, public servants are spending other people's money and they don't give a crap. That's the other thing.
Well, to be fair, I think a lot of them, do give a crap, right? But at the end of the day, the big focus needs to be on outcomes. And what we've gone through over the sort of recent years is what's called confetti economics. And confetti economics, where you spray money around like confetti. And to be fair, we needed to spray a bit of money around, but you've got to get results.
Yeah.
And that's the ultimate decider in regard to a delivery mechanism, or how we need to benchmark what's going on. Is it whether we're getting results?
How important is this budget in terms of business confidence, in terms of, and boy, if we've heard it once, we've heard it 100 times from Luxon and Willis, how important could this budget be in growing the economy or getting things moving in the right direction again, getting out of, technical recession, getting out of the doldrums economically?
Well, we're out of recession. So the issue is that, we got the stuffing beaten out of us in 2024. We're probably going to need to see sort of 9-12 months of growth before we get what's called the level of activity back to more acceptable levels. But there's I'm not too worried about the next sort of 12 months. The Reserve Bank can engineer an economic recovery by cutting interest rates, which is what they've been doing.
Yeah.
And the biggest story to me in New Zealand is that how are we going to perform over the next sort of 4, 5, 10 years? And that comes back to productivity growth.
Yeah.
And if you look at, 10 years ago, productivity growth averaged 1.4% per year.
Yeah.
For the last decade, it's averaged 0.3%,
Yeah.
which is an absolute disgrace.
So the
And-
depreciation changes may encourage more investment in business, more growth, more activity.
Yeah, well, that's one lever.
Yep.
But look, we suffer from a phenomenon across this country called road conitis. There's more road cones than sheep. You travel around the country, and the quality of our infrastructure is woeful. Yeah, the government is turning the dial on education, but boy, are we behind the ball in regard to education achievement and attendance.
Yeah.
When you see the OECD talks about in their economic report of New Zealand last year, and they talked about a 4 percentage point hit to productivity because of declining education achievement and attendance over a 10-year period. It's a bit eye-opening in regard to what we face. Look, we've got a long road ahead to get this economy back on track. Now, the government, they're going to pull levers, infrastructure. Yeah, there's stuff in regard to water investment. You can look at the regulatory stuff, and we've turned the corner. Yeah, but what worries me is that do we get that balance right? Because to get that balance right, you've got to be investing what's called the economic and the social side of the ledger. And I worry about if we don't invest enough in the social side of the ledger, we focus too much on the economics, we're going to see what's called flip-flop economics, ping pong, where we go from one side of the ledger to the other.
Are you going to the lockup, Cam?
Yeah, I'll be locked up.
You lucky thing. You lucky
for
thing,
3.5 hours.
Do you really enjoy them? Just on a pencil.
Look, I don't think there's enough real scrutiny on what's called fiscal or government policy.
Yeah.
If you look at the economists around New Zealand, they talk an awful lot till the cows come home about monetary policy, i.e. the role of the Reserve Bank and what they do with interest rates. Yeah, but I think we're entering locally and globally. It's a new era where we're entering what's called a period of what's called fiscal or government dominance, and that's usurping monetary dominance. And we need to see a lot more understanding, a lot more commentary on fiscal policy, government policy. And to just give you something overnight, Sean, we've just seen a US 10-year bond, a US 10-year treasury, which sets the global cost of capital. That just roared up to 4.58% overnight. So there's a lot more attention coming around the globe at the moment towards the strength or otherwise of government books and what that might mean for government borrowing.
Right, so money's just gone up in price.
Yeah, it has.
Yeah. Oh, damn. It's always expensive. Cam, have a wild time at the lockup, mate. We'll talk soon. Thank you for your time this morning. That is Cameron Bagrie from Bagrie Economics. And look, most of you, I must say, don't appear to be hanging out for this afternoon. Not interested in speculation about the budget. Please focus on the co-governance woo-woo in government departments in the parliamentary service. Thank you. Doesn't matter what the budget does or means. If you're white, you're disadvantaged anyhow, says Andrew.
You've done the right thing. You've insulated your ceiling. You've insulated your underfloor. But you're still cold. Best you finish the job and to match your walls.